Munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine ku mutendera gw'ensi yonna era ng'ono yatwala omusango gwa General Kaguta Museveni mutabani we n'abakungu mu government mu kkooti y'ensi yonna eyakulemberamu ya Icc nga ye mukulu Bruce Afran. Ku kyabadde ku Kisawe Entebe nga bakuwamba omukulembeze Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine avuddeyo n'asekerera Mwami Museveni n'agamba nti yagudde mu kazannyo kaabwe, yagudde mu katego kaabwe, bwe bujulizi bwe banoonya obw'okwongera mu Icc nti Mwami Museveni yeetemye endatti era yeekubya akakumbi ku mutwe yekka nti ebinaddirira yajja okunyumizaako abeewaabwe nti ye ali kuzina amasebbeke kubanga yayongedde okufuna obujulizi bw'agenda okwongera okwanguya ku musango gwa Museveni okulagira akwatibwe. Kansoke nkwe munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine mu kkooti y'ensi yonna ng'ayogera ku kyakoleddwa ku Kyagulanyi n'abo abawagizi ba National Platform omuli ne munnamawulire Ssessanga Batte abawambiddwa ne babuzibwawo. Bruce.
The show.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be back here. I'm glad to talk with you all again. And I hear from JB that people are out there listening, so that's great.
Actually, they love to hear from you. Bruce, thank you for accepting our invitation again. Let us start with the incident that took place on the 5th of October when His Excellency Bobi Wine returned back from Uganda. Maybe let me just explain briefly. Could be you did not get each and every detail of what happened. His Excellency Bobi Wine, remember, had gone to the diaspora to interact with the Ugandans in the diaspora, in Canada, in America, and then in South Africa. So on the 5th, he had to fly back to Uganda. And immediately when he just landed, actually before he could even get out of the plane, he used the Rwanda Air. He was grabbed by 70 security operatives that disguised as airport workers. They grabbed him and dumped him in a tinted vehicle that was actually waiting for him. He was gruesomely grabbed, not actually arrested like some media outlets put it, because that was not an arrest, at least according to me. And then he was driven at high speed, dumped at his home in Magere. I want us to go into details about that. I don't know whether you followed very well the entire story. What came to your mind after watching the video? What came to your mind after getting to know everything that happened to Bobi Wine on the 5th of October?
Well, JB, I also spoke with Bobby shortly after he got home, and he did explain to me in detail what happened. You know, first of all, as you say, this was not an arrest. This was an abduction of the leading opposition figure and one of the most important political figures in the country. Essentially, what the government did was it hijacked an airplane on the runway. It broke into an airplane on the runway. It grabbed passengers off, and it took them hostage. That was Bobby Wine. So, you know, this was no arrest. No charges have been made. He wasn't brought to a judge. He was taken illegally from an airplane on a runway. The government agents effectively hijacked that airplane. They took its passenger, abducted him. It's a form of kidnapping. Threw him brutally into a car, threw him on the seats, forced him to stay down. Then they drove in a convoy of 7 or 8 cars. And then they went to a military base where they changed cars. And then they brought Bobby to his home. So the government says we escorted him from the airport to his home. That's very nice if it was an honor guard. But what they did was they abducted him from an airplane on the runway, threw him into an unmarked car, and dragged him to his home, where they kept him under house arrest for a full day and night. 75 soldiers and police broke into the grounds at Bobby's compound. They terrorized the gate man. They crushed his genitals. He was sent to hospital in Kampala. This is not escorting someone home. This is not an arrest. This is an illegal kidnapping and home invasion by people who are supposed to be respecting the law.
Bruce, I want us to divert a little bit to the international media outlets, because immediately after the incident, there was media platforms internationally, like BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, CNN, and very many others, they immediately reacted and actually started reporting about this incident. What does it speak to you? What does this communicate?
Oh, you know, JB, what was so incredible was that within minutes,
yes,
entire international media was reporting on what happened. This shows us how important, number one, Bobi Wine is internationally, how much the international community knows the Museveni government has become simply a gang of criminals. And they are watching the Museveni government continuously. Within minutes of Bobi's being taken from that plane, all of these reports were out there. Now, the New York Times waited till they got confirmation, and I spoke to them. And I would recommend people read that article. It was very hard-hitting. That New York Times article, for example, is going to be seen by every foreign ministry in the world. So all the Museveni government, really gang, has done is make Bobi much more important even than he was. It's demonstrated to the international community that Uganda's government under Museveni is a gang of thugs. All they had to do was let Bobi come off that plane, greet people at the airport, and respect the rights of the people of Uganda. And then Museveni would have been seen as a proper president who respects the law. Instead, what he did was he acted as a criminal, and he made the world pay attention even more to the corruption and abuse in Uganda. So this was actually an important victory for the opposition parties in Uganda today. Museveni has lost out very badly. And part of the proof of how important this was and how harmed Museveni is now by it is that they released Bobi from house arrest within one day. They knew they couldn't keep him there any longer because it was creating an international incident. Now, Bobi Wine and the NUP will continue their campaign under the law. And that campaign is going to grow even stronger now that Museveni did this. Dictators never learn their lesson. But JB, it does show us how very important Uganda has become internationally because of Bobi's campaign and the dictatorship. Bobi is now seen as a statesman challenging this dictatorship. And that's why all those news outlets around the world covered this so quickly.
You were still saying something?
Yeah, JB, I just want to say you're absolutely right about the importance of all that news coverage.
Yes. Then also, you remember there was the before, during, and after. And in all these scenarios, over 300 Ugandans across the country, of course, in different parts of Uganda, were arrested. And actually, most of them are still missing, including a one former BBS Terefina journalist by the name Sesanga Bate. Up to now, no one knows where he is. No single communication has been made between his family and where he is, friends, lawyers. No one knows where he is. And of course, he joins a list of very many others that are still missing upon their abductions, including the 300 that were arrested. Can these unauthorized arrests be considered as evidence in the ongoing ICC case against Museveni and his son? Like you had said previously, remember the last time you were here, you said whatever the Museveni government does, it can fuel up the ongoing case at ICC. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, you might say, JB, that General Museveni and his son are the gift that keeps giving. Every time they do this, they help our case internationally. So every time they abduct new people, every time they do what they did to Bobi, every time they beat the gate men, every time they make a journalist disappear, all of that is new evidence to go to the court. And more of it is being captured on video. So there's more and more evidence of the people who are doing these things. And so, yes, each of these disappearances, beatings, abuse, torture, all of that will form new evidence to the ICC. And so we're going to start gathering those affidavits and supplementing to the ICC. So all Museveni and his son Muhoozi are doing is creating more evidence.
When Bobi Wine was coming back to Uganda, remember, he did not go alone in the diaspora. He went with some leaders of the National Unity Platform, including a honorable member of parliament by the name Nyeko Derek, who actually captured the video that went viral. You know, the video that Al Jazeera used, Reuters used, and a couple of international media platforms. The communication has been made between his family and where he is, friends, lawyers. No one knows where he is, and of course, he joins a list of very many others that are still missing upon their abductions, including the 300 that were arrested. Can these unauthorized arrests be considered as evidence in the ongoing ICC case against Museveni and his son? Like you had said previously, remember the last time you were here, you said whatever the Museveni government does, it can fuel up the ongoing case at ICC. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, you might say, JB, that General Museveni and his son are the gift that keeps giving. Every time they do this, they help our case internationally. So every time they abduct new people, every time they do what they did to Bobby, every time they beat the gate men, every time they make a journalist disappear, all of that is new evidence to go to the court. And more of it is being captured on video. So there's more and more evidence of the people who are doing these things. And so, yes, each of these disappearances, beatings, abuse, torture, all of that will form new evidence to the ICC. And so we're going to start gathering those affidavits and supplementing to the ICC. So all Museveni and his son Muhoozi are doing is creating more evidence.
When Bobi Wine was coming back to Uganda, remember, he did not go alone in the diaspora. He went with some leaders of the National Unity Platform, including a honorable member of parliament by the name Nyeko Derek, who actually captured the video that went viral. You know, the video that Al Jazeera used, Reuters used, and a couple of international media platforms. In that video, some of these perpetrators are captured live, and you can easily identify their faces. Now, here's the question. If such kind of violations are well profiled, can these people be added on the list of most wanted?
You know, we've said, JB, all along that we are watching. And every time a soldier, a police officer, an officer, a commander, no matter what rank they are, does these things, they can and will be reported as subjects of the ICC complaint. And so all of these people, when they do these things, when they grab a man off the street, when they grab Bobby off a plane, when they throw him down, when they abuse him, all of these people will be subject to the ICC. And people need to start to understand there'll be a day of reckoning. It takes the ICC time, but that day will come. And, you know, there's something else, JB. Eventually, Museveni and his son will no longer be in power. All dictatorships die at some point. Whether it comes through the next election, whether it comes because Museveni has a heart attack, maybe there'll be a revolution, who knows? But there comes a time when dictators leave office or die or are forced out. And then the courts will come back and will do their jobs again. And all of these people, these soldiers, these officers who've been doing these things, running these torture centers, abusing people, torturing them, they will go before the courts of Uganda once this dictatorship is gone. And so people need to understand that when they do these things today, they think they have impunity. They think they can't be touched. Well, under the dictatorship of Museveni, maybe they can't be touched. But when Museveni is gone, the courts will start to do their job again in Uganda. And all those people who think they can act outside the law today will be in the dock tomorrow. And people need to understand that. You know, remember East Germany was under the communists? And they shot people at the Berlin Wall. They killed people who tried to escape. When the communists fell, those commanders and those soldiers went on trial, and they went to prison for shooting those people as they tried to leave East Germany. Every dictatorship ends up in court. Once the dictator falls, the commanders, the police, they go on trial. And so I want people in Uganda to know, I want those police and soldiers and commanders to know, there will be a day when they will be on trial in a proper court of law for the things they've done. And their only protection is to stop doing them. Just stop doing them. Stop arresting people, beating people, torturing people. Stop listening to these orders. They are illegal. And someday those who do them will be in court in Uganda once this dictator is gone. And that day will come.
Very many people are waiting for that day. Very many are praying for such day. And of course, just like you said, that day will come. Bruce, I want you to take us through the international laws and regulations governing the airports. I want you to relate it to the incident that took place on the 5th of October when His Excellency Bobi Wine was grabbed off the plane. What are some of those international regulations and laws, and how do they affect the Ugandan government in this case?
Yes. Thank you, JB. I think you may have cut out on my end for a moment. The international law is very, very clear. We have a host of laws that govern governments. There's the UN Convention on Civil and Political Rights, for example. There's the Icc Convention. There are numerous what we call customary international laws. All of these things govern governments. And first and foremost among them, every government must respect the political rights of the people of its country. They must let those people have political expression. They must let political opponents campaign and oppose the government. They must let the press be free. International law mandates all of this. And the Uganda Constitution mandates it. What Museveni is doing today is violating the Constitution. There will come a time when he will, or his officers and commanders will be in court because they're violating that Constitution. So international law and Uganda law together are very powerful tools. And everything they do to stop campaigning, to stop the free press, to intimidate journalists, to arrest journalists, like the BBC journalist who's missing, all of that violates international law, and all that violates the Uganda Constitution. You know, I want to add one more thing, JB, in terms of what you said about, you know, Ugandans want that day to come. You know,
yes.
I've said this before on the show. That day will come only if Ugandans make that day come. You know, the ICC can prosecute and governments can speak, but only inside Uganda can change really come. You know, and a lot of those young people who support Bobi, they must register to vote because there will be another election. But if they say, I'm not going to vote, I can't make a change, they're handing power back to Museveni. So people got to be registered to vote for that next election. And people have got to protest. They've got to go to the streets. They've got to stand in the streets. Yes, a few people might get beat up by the police. That's true. But only a few. And people have to join in the streets, in their town, in Kampala, etc. You know, when Bobi goes out in Kampala, people need to follow him. People need to show the government the support that there is. It's never going to happen if people wait for others to do it. You know, that's why when those crowds followed Bobi in the campaign across the country in August and September, that was the way to do it. People must come out. They must come out and support. That's why the government arrested Bobi, because they wanted to stop people from massing and meeting him as he came off the plane. That's why they stopped it. And that shows us how important it is for the Ugandan people to be there on the streets speaking and protesting. Nothing is more important than that. You know, if 1,000 people would get in front of the State House in Kampala and sit there in a sit-down protest, that speaks more than any court case internationally. If 10,000 people would go to the State House and sit there in silent protest, that speaks immense volumes. That's how dictators leave power. So the Ugandan people have got to take what we've started and what they've started and continue it and keep it going and have courage.
On that note, as we finalize, there are some Ugandans, of course, as a media personality, I always interact with the different kinds of Ugandans in the comment section, on the streets. And some think that someone in America is going to come and help them with Museveni in Uganda. Just explain briefly as we wind up to these people who think that someone in America or Europe or China, wherever, that is going to come and help Ugandans with Museveni.
Well, JB, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you very well.
Look, I can do what I do as a lawyer.
Yes.
But I can't come from the outside and come into make that change. It's not for me in America to make that change. It's for people in Uganda to make that change. You know, I can do what I do as a lawyer. I can use my skill internationally. I can give guidance and advice, and I do that actually. But it's got to be people in Uganda who do this. I'm on the outside speaking, and I think that's very important. But my job is to motivate people in Uganda to do their job, not to come from America and save Uganda. No dictator was ever removed by outsiders. It only happens when the people of the country have said, I'm fed up and I'm not going to take it anymore. And they start protesting and massing. Only if the people do that. And remember, the police can beat up a few dozen people. But if 10,000 people gather, they can't get rid of 10,000 people. They might shoot one or two people, I know, and that would be horrible. But they can't shoot everyone. They can't beat up everyone, and they can't arrest everyone. Museveni does that to terrorize people, to keep them home. You've got to say, I'm going to get out on the street. I'm not going to stay home. Because only if Ugandans do that can democracy come. Not from the outside, not from Bruce in America, not from Joe Biden, or not from the ICC either. It's only going to happen by people in Uganda who use what we've started and make that happen. I hope that answers the question, JP.
Of course, you've explained it very well. This is the very last one, Bruce. You followed very well the police statements where it said that they just escorted His Excellency Bobi Wine from the airport to his home in Magere. But of course, the video shows something different. Now, if you had not watched that video, and perhaps you had not seen anything or a photo, and you had just heard the statements from the police, would you agree with their statements?
No, JB, I would not. And you know why?
Why? Why?
Because they've done this before. When the election was finished, they arrested Bobby in his house. They broke into his compound. They broke into his house. They wouldn't let Bobby and his wife out of the building, not even to get food from the vegetable garden. They pushed them back in. They beat up his staff, and that was 2 years ago after the election. So, and what happened then? They said, well, we're protecting him because he's so important. So they make these excuses all the time, but the facts are known. They're abusing the law, they're breaking in, and they're working to forcibly keep the people from seeing Bobby. And this tells us how important Bobby has become to democracy in Uganda. That the government needs to constantly try to interfere tells us how dangerous this campaign is to this dictatorship.
All right, thank you, Bruce. It has been wonderful having you again. Till next time, maybe if you have your final message to the Ugandan community in Uganda and those in the diaspora.
Yeah, I would say, JB, that those in the diaspora have to be speaking to their governments outside of Uganda and making it clear they want action by their governments. But really, this lesson teaches us something. Why did they arrest Bobby at the airplane? Because they knew Bobby had called for a 1 million-person walk in Uganda, in Kampala. They didn't want the people of Uganda to be seeing Bobi as he came back home. And that tells us that Ugandans have to be the ones on the ground making this happen. And Ugandans can today go to Bobi's house, go to his compound, stand there in silent protest to say, we're here. We support Bobi. And the next time Bobi starts a campaign or a meeting or a protest or a walk in Kampala, people have to join him. People have to tell everyone this is happening, because that's what the government fears. It fears people being with the opposition leader. And that's what this incident tells us, that they are desperately afraid of Bobi being with the leader of the opposition, of Bobi being with the people. You know, and I'll finally, close and say that this is an example of what Museveni is doing wrong. Museveni needs to simply let democracy do its job. Be a responsible government. Let Bobi meet the people. Then he will be seen as someone who is not a dictator. And then he will have more legitimacy. But every time he arrests Bobi, every time he interferes with protests, every time they beat Ugandans in the streets, they destroy the legitimacy of their own government. So this was a victory, JB, for democracy. Arresting Bobi Wine at that airport was another victory for democracy in Uganda. Thank you again, JB. Thank you, JB, for everything you're doing on your show.
Thank you again for accepting our invitation, and we hope to have you again next time.
Thank you, JB. The New York Times article, for example, is going to be seen by every foreign ministry.
Blues Aflan ye munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine ku mutendera gw'ensi yonna era nga ye yakulemberamu okutwala omusango mu kkooti y'ensi yonna ICC, omusango ogwakkirizibwa nti ddala Mwami Museveni yaguzza. Era bino byajja bubi kuba kkooti yakkiriza nti omusango guno genda nagwo mu maaso, era munnamateeka ono n'ategeeza bannayuganda ko ne President Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine nti tulina kati okuteeka Mwami Museveni kazito, tulina okwongera omuteeka ku bunkenke, twongere okumukozesa ensobi. Kkooti eno eyanguyirwe okusala omusango n'okugumala mangu, tufunemu mangu. Kati Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine kyaliko okukozesa General Kaguta Museveni ensobi, era ng'ensobi ezo General Kaguta Museveni azigwamu. Kati no Blues Aflan munnamateeka agamba nti obuvunaanyizibwa obunene, loodi ennene, omulimu omunene guli eri ggwe munnayuganda nange. Ffe tulina okuvaayo. Bwe tulaba nga poliisi egenze mu maka gaawo Kyagulanyi nga bamusazeewo tebaagala aveeyo, naffe tugende tubeerewo. Batukoleko obulabe n'ekifaananyi nga kifuluma nti tuli wamu ne Kyagulanyi, Mwami Museveni kajja kuba kaweddemu. Kyagulanyi yonna gy'atuyita nti kati tugenda wano tubeere ne Kyagulanyi, Mwami Museveni kajja kuba kaweddemu. Nti ffe tulina okulemberamu olutabaalo luno. Mwami Museveni ajja kugezaako okutta ku bantu naye bajja kuba batono, kuba international community ejja kureactingirawo immediately nga Mwami Museveni atandise okukola ekyobujega okutta bannansi ate balina okukuuma. Kati nno ffe tulina okugamba nti ekimala kimala. Mwami Museveni atuviire, Mwami Museveni agende, Mwami Museveni va wano, genda owummule okuba kuwummula. Bw'aba aganye okuwummula tulina okumufoosinga. Bwe tugenda okufunira emirembe, bwe tugenda okufunira essanyu, bwe tugenda okufunira obwetwaze bw'eggwanga lyaffe. Blues Aflan yabyogedde. Era ye yagamba Kyagulanyi nti kati genda osisinkana abantu, teeka Mwami Museveni kazito akawulire. Ddala Mwami Museveni akazito akawulidde, amaliriza ali mu nsobi. Basooka gamba bomu byagana byayitaawo, kati nti kwa budakitinga Kyagulanyi olabe kikoze internationally. Mwami Museveni kimutuddemu, kimulidde. Ali mu kwewoonaganya akola kino na kino, anoonya waayita okukivaamu tewali, yakituddemu dda, kyamulidde dda. Kati nno munnayuganda andaba gwampuliriza wenna gy'oli. Tambuza obubaka bumu nti tulina okusevinga Uganda nga tugenze ku nguudo awo wali omulamwa. buli ayogera gamba abantu tugenda ku nguudo mu mirembe. Agambye nti tusaana okusalawo tugenda kati ku State House. Tetukiriziganya na musajja ali mu State House. Ne tugenda netutula ku State House n'ebipande byaffe mu mirembe. Kati Mwami Museveni asindike SFC ekube bannayuganda amasasi kajja kuba kaweddemu. Tulina kwongera kumuteeka ku bunkenke. Tulina kwongera kumuteeka kazito. Tulangirire nti kati tugenda ku State House lunaku z'omwezi bweziti atudde mu State House siffe twamuteekayo yabba bubbi kalulu. Mwami Museveni ajja kukola ensobi, ajja kutitira akola ensobi, international community ajja kuyingira mangu nnyo. State House ajja kugirekawo kakukola tondeka nnyuma bannayuganda mweddiza ensi yammwe. Bigambo bya munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Bruce Aflan eyatwala omusango mu kkooti y'ensi yonna ogutuwadde kalembereza. Kati nno tutegedde ekyokukola. Kigambe munno naye akitegeere. Mbaagala nnyo mwenna abaliko mwebale kubaako. Mukama Katonda nsaba bankuumire tulabe ku Uganda empya. Mweraba.